The Winter War was a conflict that proves the superiority of numbers of men doesn't always necessarily mean an easy victory. This war would start on the 30th of November 1939 and would end on the 13th of March 1940. In the end, Finland would lose about 10% of their territory and suffered around 70,000 total casualties. The Soviets, however, would suffer around 321,000 to 381,000 casualties and would gain land north of Lake Ladoga. The Karelian Isthmus, islands in the Gulf of Finland, land in the region of Sala, the Russian Peninsula, and the Hanko Peninsula would be leased to the Soviets as a military base for the next 30 years. In the 1500s, the Swedish gained control over territory that now would be part of Finland. Before Swedish control, there were kingdoms varying in size, tribal areas, earldoms, and clan territories. But in the 1800s and 1810s, what was happening? Well, the Napoleonic Wars. Napoleon and the Russian Tsar, Alexander I, signed the Treaty of Tilsit in 1807. The treaty set Russia and France against Sweden and Britain. In the next year, 1808, Russia invaded the Swedish Grand Duchy of Finland and the territory would be absorbed into the Russian Empire. In 1809, there was an agreement between the Finnish Parliament and the Tsar. So Finland would pay taxes to the Russian crown and be in the Russian Empire. But the Finns would have a high level of autonomy. Finland would be part of the Russian Empire for more than a century following. On the 6th of December, 1917, Finland declared independence from Russia. Russia was in a civil war between the Whites and the Reds at the time Finland declared independence. In Finland, there was going to be a civil war between the Whites and the Reds.
Kauan on kärsitty ryssien valta, Suomen kansan vapautta suojellessa. The Finnish Civil War started on the 27th of January 1918. The Reds were strong in the cities, but the Whites were strong with the elite and in the countryside. Most Finns lived in small towns, villages, and in the countryside at the time. Both sides were supported by outside forces. The Whites got money, weapons, and even troops from Germany, who at the time was fighting World War I. And the Reds got sent weapons and troops from the Bolsheviks in Russia. The Whites won the 4 major battles in the war, those being the Battle of Tampere, the Battle of Helsinki, the Battle of Leyte, and the Battle of Viborg. The Reds did, however, win a number of smaller skirmishes, but these were not enough to win the Civil War. The Civil War ended on the 15th of May, 1918. In the Civil War, a large number of prisoners on the right side died or were sent to camps in Russia, never to return. And an estimated 12,000 Red prisoners died of disease, malnutrition, and exposure. The Whites won the Civil War, unlike the Whites in Russia. Finland's position in foreign relations was not ideal. With Finland's geography to the Soviet Union, it made it unavoidable for the Finns to deal with the Soviets. A lot of Finns disliked the USSR, and the Finns viewed Hitler with caution and alarm. Finland explored aligning with the UK and France, but didn't move to create a military alliance fraught with danger. Finland could try to make alliances with smaller nations. The biggest of those smaller nations was Sweden. Finland had old ties to Sweden, and there were many people of Swedish descent in Finland. But Sweden had made it a policy to be like Switzerland, so this was for some time. The policy was to remain neutral in conflicts that wouldn't threaten the country itself. So a formal alliance with Finland would break that policy. The Finns did have a sort of mutual aid pact with, guess who? The Estonians. The countries share a linked history, and both were part of the Russian Empire. But Estonia had a small population of just over 1 million, while Finland was over 3 million. Both combined paled in comparison to the Soviets. So the Soviet demands weren't too bad, that is in quotations, and they were even willing to trade land from eastern Karelia to the Finns. The Soviet demands would be that Finland destroy all existing fortifications on the Karelian Isthmus, gain territory on the Karelian Isthmus, gain the Russian Peninsula, islands in the Gulf of Finland, and the Finnish would lease the Hanko Peninsula for 30 years, and also that the Soviets establish a military base there. Finns rejected the Soviet demands. The Finns offered to see the port of Trevokai in a late round of talks in late October and early November 1939. The Soviets didn't accept the Finnish offer, which was much less than what they were demanding. The Finns didn't ignore the idea that the Soviets would just invade and attempt to take what they wanted, so the Finns began to mobilize the armed forces. They didn't say it was a mobilization and didn't issue a nationwide call for men, but issued local orders for refresher training with troops near the Soviet border. The Soviets had the biggest army in the world, with about 2 million men at the time the Winter War started, but many of them had the most basic training, and the Soviets used just under half of them in the Winter War. They deployed around 1,500 to 3,000 tanks, a lot of artillery, and then deployed 300 to 500 planes in the Finnish war zone. Over the course of the war, the Finns deployed around 300,000 to 350,000 men and less than 40 tanks and around 120 aircraft to counter the Soviets. Positive factors for the Finns were that they were fighting for their country and they knew the land. Most Soviets were not equipped to fight in the cold, and it did get cold, and a lot of Soviet casualties came from frostbite. The Finns were able to get closer to the tanks due to the short hours of the winter than if otherwise, and Stalin carried out a purge of the military previously, which meant removing thousands of experienced officers and replacing them with worse officers. A negative factor for the Finns was that they lacked anti-tank weapons, but they would improvise with Molotov cocktails. Supplementing the Finnish forces was a female auxiliary group that came into existence during the Finnish Civil War called the Lotta Svärd. They didn't fight on the front lines in the Winter War, although some did carry sidearms, and the Lottas took over jobs of men who went into the military. The Mannerheim line was starting to be reinforced at the same time as the refresher training. The Mannerheim line was a modern defensive belt. It had reinforced concrete bunkers, an elaborate trench system, mines, barbed wire. It also had interlocking fields of machine gun positions, and a lot of the Finns' artillery was located on the Mannerheim line. The Mannerheim line was on the Korean Isthmus, which is the land bridge between Lake Ladoga and the Gulf of Finland, so there was little room to maneuver. That allowed the Finns to concentrate the lesser number of men to a specific spot, so the Mannerheim line was a good defensive line. On November 26, 1939, Soviet guns fired on their own positions in a village, Mainila, close to Leningrad. It was supposed to make it look like the Finns attacked the Soviets, a false flag operation. The Soviets claimed that the fire came from the Finns, and that the attack killed 20 to 25 Soviet soldiers. The Finns proposed a commission from neutral nations to investigate the incident, but the Soviets rejected it. The Soviets and the Finns waged a war of words in the press about the incident. On the 29th of November, the USSR formally broke off diplomatic relations with Finland. The Soviets renounced their non-aggression pact and began the invasion of Finland on November 30th, 1939. The same day the war began, the Soviets bombed the Finnish capital of Helsinki in the morning, wounding around 300 and killing 97. It also caused a lot of property damage. The Soviets, on the first day of the Winter War, invaded Finland with 21 divisions totaling around 450,000 men. In the Winter War, most of the heaviest fighting occurred along the Mannerheim line, so let's focus on that now. The Soviets had a lot of the men in the Korean Isthmus, around 130,000, and the Soviets almost numbered the Finnish forces around twofold, with around 250,000 men. The Finns, wanting to delay the Soviets and also inflict damage, had a force of around 21,000 men ahead of the Mannerheim line. All the Finnish forces who were ahead of the Mannerheim line had withdrawn to the Mannerheim line by the 6th of December. The Battle of Tapal, which was the first major attack against the Mannerheim line, began the same day. The Soviets did attack after attack in the battle, with all of them in vain, for none of them were able to move the Finns. I guess after hearing what I just said, you know who won the battle. The Soviets lost dozens of tanks and thousands of men, significantly less than the Finns. The battle ended on the 27th of December, with the Finns, not shockingly, being victorious. The Soviets used two tactics that they had previously used. The first was to use wave after wave of men, but the Finns had higher ground and had a view of the waves of men. And the second was to spread the tanks far apart, but the Soviet tanks got bogged down and also got isolated in the snow. The Finns, in their wrath, came with the Molotov cocktails and with white suits and farewell to the tanks. Going over 321 and 8,688 kilometers to the north, yes, I said kilometers, or 200 miles if you so desire, the Soviet 139th Rifle Division, numbering around 20,000 men, launched an attack against the outnumbered Finns at around 4,000 men near the town of Javri. This means that the Finns were outnumbered around 5-4. The Finns were commanded by Ariel Pajeri and Colonel Pavel Talvia. The Battle of Tralvozvi occurred on the 12th of December, with the battle birthing the legends of the Finnish ski troops and Finland's resistance in the Winter War. The Finns, as I guess you think, won the battle, with the Finns suffering around 100 killed in action, 250 wounded, and 150 captured, while on the other hand the Soviets suffered around 4,000 to 5,000 men killed, around 5,000 wounded, and the Finns destroyed or captured at the lowest around 30 Soviet cannons and destroyed and disabled around 60 tanks and armored vehicles. The victory lifted Finnish morale. Further north, early on in the war, the Soviet 14th Army was successful in taking the northern Finnish port of Petsamo. Landing parties from the Arctic fleet were aided by men moved overland. From the Petsamo base, the Soviets advanced along the Arctic Highway. The Soviets were successful in taking the nickel mines at Salimjavi by the 15th of December, and the Soviet advance reached Nazi on the 19th of December. Due to supply difficulties in the extremely cold weather and also part to Finnish resistance, the Soviets parted from Nazi to around 20 miles north, resupplied and reinforced the Soviets for another time advanced to Nazi, but they never got any farther. Staying in the north, the Battle of Sala began on the first day of the war. The Soviets launched an attack with the Soviet 172nd Rifle Division against the Finns and successfully pushed the Finns up to the Kemijoki River. But the Soviets overstretched the positions, which the Finns exploited by attacking with ski troops. Both sides had received reinforcements in December. In mid-January, the Soviet 172nd Division was ordered to retreat to Makamajvi village, which they had successfully captured before. The battle was a stalemate for the next 2 months, aside from artillery exchanges and small scrimmages. As you can guess, the Soviets took more casualties than the Finns, but the Finns had help from the Swedish Volunteer Corps, which, quite obviously, the Corps had Swedes, but also had Norwegians and Danes. Going south, north of the Korean Isthmus in Lake Ladoga, the Soviets significantly outnumbered the Finns in the area, 3-1 in manpower. The Soviet tasks were advance in the area between these two places and destroy the Finnish forces. The Finns retreated in the face of the outnumbering and overwhelming Soviet army. On the 7th of December, the Battle of Kola started. The Finns were outnumbered. The Soviets took more casualties than the Finns, and same old. The battle ended on the 13th of March, 1940. Uniquely, from the battle came the phrase, Kola Wuhord, which can be used when someone is faced with a difficult situation. So, Marshal Carl Gustav Emil Mannerheim radioed Erwin Jutilian, the local commander, asking, "Can Kola hold?" Jutilian signaled back, "Kola will hold, unless we're ordered to run." There was more fighting in the Dogi Karelia, but I won't get into it. Going north to the region of Susalami, on the 30th of November, the Soviet 163rd Rifle Division crossed the border with the objective to make it to the city of Ulu, which borders the Gulf of Bothnia, and control the roads around the city. It would only be a Finnish city lost, but also effectively cut Finland in half. The Finnish had only 1 battalion of men in the area for around 8 days. The Soviets successfully captured the town of Susalami on the 7th of December. The Finns had burned the town, and it was a pile of smoldering ruins. Wiki says it's a village, but the book I've used says town, so I'm just gonna say town. The Finns had retreated to the other side of Lake Kienjavari. The town lies on the banks of the lake, to observe what the Soviets would do next and then plan their tactics accordingly. The Soviets' next move was to try to flank the Finnish positions, but their attempt failed. On the 9th of December, the Finnish colonel Jvelmar Sisavu took control of Finnish troops in the area, and the Finns were reinforced with a regiment. Colonel Jvelmar's first order was to attack on Susalami. The attack was repulsed with heavy losses. Finns successfully encircled the town of Susalami, and the Soviets attempted to break the encirclement multiple times, but failed. By the 27th of December, the Finns, reinforced with 2 Jaeger regiments, attacked and successfully retook the town. Some Soviets fled and escaped down the right road in a panic. There, the Soviets met troops from the Soviet 44th Rifle Division, which caused a traffic jam, and discipline was put together with harsh methods after falling apart. Many Soviets fled into the forest, where most of them would die by being hunted by Finns or by freezing to death. The following is from the book The Winter War, a captivating guide to the Russo-Finnish War between Finland and the Soviet Union by captivating history. Over the course of the next 4 days, the Finns moved and skied circles around the islands, cutting off units from another and wiping them out one by one. Many of these attacks came at night, making them even more terrifying to the men of the Red Army. Sometimes,
they would hear a battle begin just down the line, and then in darkness. The force, muffled or exaggerated, sound depending on the area's topography. Sometimes this battle sounded far off, and the next thing they knew, the Soviets had units of Finns whipping right through them. Sometimes this battle took place quite a ways off, but sounded as if it was next door, and the panic screams of their comrades set the rest of the Soviets in the area on edge. The Battle of Susalami would end on the 8th of January, with the Finnish being victorious. The battle also boosted Finnish morale. Finns on the Rat-Susalami road captured 43 tanks, 29 anti-tank guns, 70 field guns, and also capturing numbers of rifles, horses, machine guns, trucks, and ammunition. The Soviets took significantly more casualties than the Finns. The Battle of Susalami has been held up by generations of Finns as the greatest victory of the Winter War. Going back to the Korean Isthmus, the Soviets reorganized and reinforced the army in January, and they began the final drive on the Korean Isthmus on the 1st of February. The Soviets successfully pierced the mannerheim line in the Second Battle of Suma. The First Battle of Suma was a Finnish victory which occurred in December, though it was less important than the Second Battle of Suma. The Soviets successfully won the Battle of Hokkaido, which occurred in late February. If you want to know more about the Battle of Hokkaido, I recommend watching this video. The Finns fell back slowly, and they fought determined real guard actions. They didn't entirely stop the Finns from advancing, who were getting close to Viipuri, a large Finnish city. The Gulf of Viipuri was frozen, meaning that the Soviets could attack the coastline on the other side of the Gulf and not have to go on actual land. If there were normal conditions, the ice would be too unstable for heavy Soviet vehicle traffic. Finns had garrisons on islands in the Gulf of Viipuri that were successful in delaying the Soviets. Fighting successfully reached the suburbs of Viipuri on the 6th of March, and the Soviets successfully established a beachhead at some time on the 5th or 6th of March on the other side of the Gulf, which was successfully expanded afterwards. The Finns were beyond the breaking point, and on the 12th of March, the Finns signed the Moscow Peace Treaty, and the following day, March 13th, 1940, the Winter War would end. Before the conclusion, Aiden, the history reporter, will talk about foreign volunteers for the Finnish.
The 3 Scandinavian countries all have volunteers, around 8,000 Swedes, 1,000 Danes, and 700 Norwegians. And there were other volunteers of different nationalities, those being 2 Austrian, 51 Belgians, 1 Czechoslovakian, 56 Estonians, 2 French, 18 Germans, 7 Italians, 4 Latvians, 2 Lithuanians, 3 Luxembourgers, 17 Dutch, 6 Polish, 1 Portuguese, 6 Swiss, 13 from the United Kingdom, 1 Yugoslavian, 350 Hungarians, 350 Americans, and 15 without nationality. Some volunteers were casualties. A lot of those occurred in the north, and some fought against the Reds. They weren't of too much help, but they were still better than nothing.
The Finns lost the war and suffered around 70,000 total casualties. They lost this territory, which is about 10% of the total territory, and had to absorb hundreds of thousands of refugees.
Some 400,000 displaced Finns moved their possessions by every possible means of transportation. The 8 million Finns are heroic in the defense of their freedom against 170 million Russians. But the Soviet-Finnish war ends with the ceding of Finnish Karelia to Russia.
But it was a shallow victory for the Soviets, who took a crazy amount of casualties themselves. Hitler was encouraged to invade the Soviets by what he saw in Finland, and the Finns would again fight the Soviets in a war, the continuation war. Thanks for watching this video. Go check out Aiden, and please like and comment. I hope you have a blessed day. May God bless you all.
Kauniina muistona Karjalamaa, mutta vieläkin syömässä soinahtaa, kun soittajan sormista kuulla saa.
Säkkijärven polkkaa.
Se polkka taas menneitä mieleen tuo, ja se outoa kaiputa rintaan luo. Ei soittaja haitarin soida suo.
Säkkijärven polkkaa.